Hi, everyone. Kumar Danatrayan here. It's just me this week, and in this segment, we're going to do Q&A with a coach, and I'm your coach. And I'm just going to pick a topic that seems to keep coming up over and over again, especially in light of our this pandemic, right? Everyone's remote, and it's hard to have productive meetings, and it's hard to create a psychologically safe environment. And so really the question that I keep getting, right, over and over again and it's not that I'm an expert here. I mean, I strive to sort of create a psychologically safe environment for meetings that I lead. And of course, I get this question a lot from folks that are leading their own meetings. And so, what are some of the ways that we can create a psychologically safe environment as we facilitate meetings? All of you have to facilitate meetings at some point or another, and I'm sure you all have had this struggle, as I have, especially with remote in a remote environment where you can't really tell if people are engaged, if they're multitasking, if they really need to be at the meeting that you're facilitating. So what are some tips and tricks that you can use to ensure that you have an engaged set of participants, that they are all sort of working together as a team to achieve the goal, the outcome of the meeting? I mean, I think the most important thing is to define, what's the purpose of the meeting? Why are you all there together, and what are you going to accomplish by the end of that meeting? There are different types of meetings. Of course, there are meetings to make a decision. So you've already sort of have several options on the table, and you're getting a group of people that have some knowledge of those options that are on the table and an opinion about those options on the table, and you're trying to get them together to make a decision. And so maybe that's the purpose, or maybe the purpose is just to brainstorm a bunch of options, right? And it's really to get a group of people, again, that have knowledge of the different options that might be out there, and you're bringing them together to brainstorm all the different ways you can solve the problem, whatever the problem is. So maybe the purpose is stating the problem. We are here to solve this problem, or maybe not solve, to brainstorm this problem. It's really to state the purpose, state the agenda. What are you there for? And what are you going to accomplish by the end of the meeting? There may be meetings where it's a continuation of a prior meeting. So really be crisp and clear about what the desired outcome is for that meeting. So besides the purpose, it's important to define the outcome at the beginning. So as you are sort of going through the purpose with your participants, ask them, what would they like to accomplish by the end of that meeting? What's the outcome? Of course, it's always good for you as a facilitator to think about that ahead of time and to provide people up front with the agenda and the desired outcome from that meeting, right? And if you do those two things, and just those two things alone, you'll be several steps ahead of many of your colleagues. I don't know how many meetings I go to where there's no agenda, there's no purpose, there's no outcome. And I can see people sort of sitting around. Well, I don't see them because they're remote, and most people don't have their cameras on. So I don't see them, but I imagine them sitting around doing something else, right? Because what else could they be doing? They're there because they feel they have to. There's a fear of missing out. FOMO sort of sets in, and so people come to the meeting because they feel that they have to be there. Well, it doesn't have to be that way, right? If you design a crisp agenda that has a purpose defined there, the outcome defined, then I think your participants may hopefully be a little excited about coming. Also, it allows people to self-select. Do I really need to be in this meeting, right? What am I going to contribute to the outcome? If the answer is nothing, then maybe they can choose not to be there. Which brings us to the next point, which I don't have. I actually is kind of really important, is for you as a facilitator to make sure you know who you're going to invite. What are those people there for? It may even behoove you, if this is a sort of a leadership type, strategy session, to talk to the individuals ahead of time to make sure that you have the right participants, that the right people are there, that so that you're not inviting 20 people. Maybe it's much better to have a smaller group who can make an impact towards the outcome. All right. Once you're in the meeting, what's the main thing to do? What that you do? Well, certainly the main thing in terms of creating psychological safety is to invite participation, right? One of the main barriers to participation is this idea that this fear almost of what am I going to say? Am I allowed to say my mind, speak my mind in this meeting? Will there be repercussions or reprimands? Am I going to hear from my boss or my boss's boss or some colleague down the hall? So it's important, as you set the expectations of the meeting and frame the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and you also talk about the risks, the opportunities that are present. You give people a chance to understand the environment that they're in. In the beginning of the meeting, it might be always good to do an icebreaker to get people to sort of check out what they were doing and check into the goal and the purpose of that meeting, right? And there's some great tools that you can use that I'm going to put down below in the comments to do a simple check-in activity in your meetings. So the other thing, of course, is to invite participation, right? And how do you do that? It's not just enough to say, hey, folks, if you have a question, raise your hand, virtual hand or physical hand if they have the cameras on. Because what happens if they don't raise their hand, but they still have things to share? How would you know? How will you gauge their participation if everyone is silent? I've been to so many meetings where I say something like, how many of you, whatever the question is, to invite participation, please raise your hand. Use the Zoom chat, the Zoom feature, and raise the virtual hand. No hands go up, right? It's just crickets. There's no participation at all. So it's better to lead with questions when you invite participation. You might say something like, I really don't know a whole lot about this topic, our first agenda item, and maybe even call out people if you know that they have experience in that. You might say, hey, Bob, I know that you have a lot of experience here. What do you think about this approach, whatever the approach is? And hopefully Bob can start to speak up. And as he starts to speak up, you can call on other folks. Hey, Sally, what do you think about what Bob's saying over there? How does that sit with you from where you're sitting? And by doing so, you're inviting people to participate. And you might be saying, well, how is that psychologically safe? Well, it's sort of a process. The check-in activity hopefully gets people to check into the meeting, to agree on the purpose and the outcome. Actually, in our facilitation class, which is coming up October 25th, we talk about several techniques that you can sort of create psychological safety for your team with the check-in activity. There's this thing called the power start. There are several other check-in activities that you can do, and we model those behaviors. And so the check-in is the first step in creating a psychologically safe environment. Of course, the next thing is to invite participation, asking lots of questions, and being comfortable with silence. When you ask a question and you don't get a response, just wait. It's coming. Trust me on this. If you normally wait 5 seconds, try to wait 10. If you normally wait 10 seconds, try to wait 15. It's awkward just asking a question and just being quiet after you ask the question. But it's a tool and technique that I use all the time. Eventually, someone will speak up. And when they do, thank them. Thank them because they were brave enough to break the silence and say something. The other thing is when you ask a question, it doesn't mean that people don't have an answer. It just means that you're giving them time and space to think about it, right? If you ask a question and they're thinking about the question, thinking how to answer, and you follow up with another question, you have interrupted their train of thought. And so whatever answer they may have been percolating around is gone. and you've disenfranchised the potential for them to respond to your question. So be patient and allow them the opportunity to respond. All right, then what's the next thing? So you've asked questions, you have encouraged participation. What happens then? The next thing is to sort of engage in the banter, in a dialogue, encourage feedback, encourage even criticism, right? Maybe you can say something provocative, which will invite some dialogue, invite conversation, right? What happens when a participant in your meeting completely disagrees with what you're saying? This happens to me all the time, by the way, when I'm training, especially when I say something and I deliberately say something provocative to get people to respond. Well, the first thing I do is never judge them for what they say, right? As a facilitator, it's always to thank them. Hey, thank you for your feedback. Tell me more. Tell me about your position. Why don't you agree with either whatever I said or whatever someone else said? Because you're encouraging feedback. And again, this works, of course, if other people say something provocative and you can sense in the room that there's some quiet, people are thinking about it. And you might say something like, Sally, how does that sit with you? How do you hear that from where you're sitting? Well, how would you respond to what Bob said? And so you're encouraging feedback, you're encouraging a dialogue, and you're encouraging ways for people to, in a safe environment, sort of respond and discuss and consider and brainstorm, think about the ideas that are being raised. So it's important to listen. It's important to understand. It's important to acknowledge. It's important to thank at every opportunity to make sure people are feeling safe to speak, right? Providing the opportunities for a healthy dialogue, facilitating those conversations. Again, it's all about giving space and time to folks as they engage with you as a facilitator. Making everyone feel like they're heard, like they are the only ones in the room with you, right? As a facilitator, that's a special skill, and you can do that. You can do that. Of course, it's easier in a room because you can, sort of have eye contact with folks. But in this day and age of the pandemic, it's maybe a little too much to ask people to turn their cameras on all the time. I ask, we try to set the ground rules at beginnings of meetings, but I don't press it. I do allow people freedom, to turn their cameras off, but I do ask them at least turn them on when you're speaking, right? The other thing I try to do in remote meetings is in the gallery view where you have, the Brady Bunch style where, everyone's in a window. That can get really fatiguing. And so what I do is I just have the speaker view where the speaker is highlighted and everyone else sort of is a small little window. That's a little easier because then it kind of, in a way, simulates the face-to-face if I was looking at someone while they were talking. And so encourage your participants to do that as well. Before you send your meeting out, send some ground rules. Hey, if you're using Zoom or WebEx, they all have similar features, and please turn your cameras on at least when you're speaking, and put your settings, your configuration on speaker view. That way you only see the person who's speaking. It lends itself to a more personal dialogue, a personal conversation. All right, so those are my few tips on how you can create some psychological safety in your meetings. Number one, clear purpose, clear outcome. Number two, well, maybe this should be number one, a check-in activity, right? So get people engaged right from the get-go. A great tool to use to do this is check-in. It's check.in, and I'll put the link down below. You should see it. And if you use that, it sort of randomizes questions that you can check in with your group with, right? So a simple question, just go around the table, the virtual table, and have people answer the question. And of course, it has a check out too. So at the end of the meeting, you can sort of do the random question at the end. Or you can come up with something more specific. Hey, did we all achieve our outcomes? What was the greatest value you got out of this meeting? And be prepared for, if they didn't get any value, then they're going to tell you, but be prepared for that and adjust your meeting style so you can make the next meeting even better. So anyway, so number one, check in. Set the space for a psychologically safe environment right from the get-go. Number two, make sure you're clear on purpose and what you're trying to accomplish in the meeting. Number three, encourage and invite participation, regardless of the type of meeting it is. Number four, acknowledge participation, invite feedback, invite criticism, invite dialogue. And finally, close the meeting and get some feedback as to whether or not you achieved the outcome, not you as a facilitator, but the group. Did they achieve their outcome? All right, that's it for me. I'm signing off. I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave your comments below, and we'll see you in a couple of